Echoes from the Temple, a show exploring Thessalian traditions and ideas.
I wish I was more tech savvy. I could.
Yeah, same here.
Now I hear you.
Oh, you
I
hear
heard
me?
that. I hear you now.
You hear me now?
Yep.
All right. I don't know.
I don't know what that's all about, but
Yeah, we went to this little thing down here and muted and unmuted, and then it popped on. I don't know why. It wasn't muted, but maybe it just needed to reset. I don't know.
well, praise the gods, we got it.
Yeah, really. All right. Well, good. Now we're on. I was about to say, you know what? We might have to reschedule till we figure out. Yeah, we got somebody listening in right now. We're trying to make sure they can hear both of us. They were telling us that they could hear you, but not us. All right, they can hear both of us now. Great deal. All right,
Fantastic.
Good to go. Now I know next time maybe that's something we can do. Good call, Justin. Justin's like, what's that little phone thing looking like down there? I was like, that's the call-in thing, but it's not muted. And then so I clicked mute, and it said unmute it, so I unmuted it, and you were like, hey, I can hear you. It's like, shit, it wasn't muted.
Yeah.
What the hell's going on?
That was the key. You thinking
Yeah.
out loud
That's it.
helped me here.
All right. Well, we're just a few minutes in, but that's good. We're gonna start off our show like we always do with a shot of Sambuca. Me and Justin here, and then
I have a little bit of single malt set aside. Ready.
all right, good. All right. Well, let's do our toast and to your health, Stinny Yamas. Oh my God, that stuff's so good. All right.
That Sambuca will get your teeth floating.
Oh yeah, love me some Sambuca, man. All right. So Homer and the Heart of Theurgy, and I finished reading, and I went through it. I mean, you had sent it to me a while back, and I had skimmed it and read through it. But then this last week, I kind of poured into it and really kind of read it a little bit more in depth. I know Justin hasn't read it at all because, you know, that was a for my eyes only when you sent it to me, so I didn't send it to anybody else. But I know he's intrigued.
I tried looking it up, and I was like, wait.
Yeah. But so first off, why don't you give us some insight as to what inspired you to put this down on paper?
Oh, well, you know, I started investigating, and you'll have to excuse me, I got a little bit of a cough right now. But I started investigating Neoplatonism when I was, you know, my two previous books are on the subject of psychedelics, and particularly the use of psychedelics in initiatory traditions and in magical traditions. And I was researching that domain, and I had encountered this model of this guy came up with this idea of what he calls the 3 stages of trance, and he bases this on Heinrich Kluver's research into mescaline, where he identified what he calls the form constants, and it's these 4 visual geometric structures that are common to people who are under the effects of mescaline.
Right.
Well, when I started looking into the 3 stages of trance, the first stage of which is characterized by these visuals, the development of it seemed very similar to what I had read previously, and I hadn't really read in that depth, but read previously about Neoplatonism, and it seemed to mirror that process. So once I dove in, I realized, holy cow, you know, there's a whole lot more in the Neoplatonic domain than just what a person with a kind of a cursory knowledge of philosophy would think of Platonism, right?
Right.
The ritual and the soul ascent and all these motifs. So So yeah, I got into it through researching, like I said, through researching psychedelics. But once I finally got into the ritual aspect of it, which I was already into through, I'm a Freemason and a Rosicrucian and a Martinist, and I study shamanic ritual, what you would call, I guess, shamanic ritual, indigenous ritual
Right.
theory. So I'm always been fascinated with ritual.
Right.
So yeah, it happened pretty organically, pretty naturally. I wouldn't have written a book on theurgy alone because I feel like that niche has already really been filled by people like Gregory Shaw, who wrote his book on the Neoplatonism of Iamblichus. You know, people like he and Chlup, and they've done such a fantastic job of laying out theurgy theoretically. I didn't see any need to repeat that. But the more I investigated theurgy, the more I ran into the problem of, we get a lot of theoretical, philosophical kind of discourse on it, but very rarely do we get a glimpse of what the ritual looks like. So when I really started tearing these documents apart, looking for discussions of what a theurgic ritual might look like, I was surprised to find that in terms of both theory and praxis, the Neoplatonists, rather than projecting theurgy into the Chaldean oracles in the 2nd century where it belongs, had a tendency to project it into the 8th century and 7th century into the Homeric epics, which I found very fascinating because, you know, if you're in the presence of any Neoplatonic scholar and you mention the notion of theurgy in the epics or anything like that, you're going to immediately be met with kind of disbelief, or, you know, somebody's going to rebut you and say, well, theurgy is limited to the 2nd century. So that's why I think it's fascinating that the Neoplatonists, even though they themselves were aware of that, tended to project it into Homer. So that's why I put pen to paper in the first place.
Right. And I mean, and it would make sense in that fashion. I mean, the works of Homer were central to just about everything in ancient Greek life. I mean, that was it. You know, that was the thing. And I liked one of the analogies, or one of the parts that you drew on was Odysseus's journey as a sort of a theurgic initiation, where he, you know, returns home as him, you know, going into the underworld and then returning home as a sort of an initiation process, as a theurgic initiation, which I never actually thought of it that way. But as soon as I read that, I was like, holy shit, yeah, I can definitely see an analogy there where that would be prominent. Like that would definitely be.
You get hints of that even in as early as like in Plotinus, where he's talking about making it back to the one, mystical union with the one, and he talks about that in terms of Odysseus' homecoming back to Ithaca.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
For him, for Plotinus, read a mystical journey, and that tendency was very much carried on. If you've read, there's a book by Robert Lamberton called Homer the Theologian that teases out all of those great Neoplatonic and Middle Platonic references to kind of a Pythagorean approach to Homer.
It is actually on my to-be-read list, sitting on my shelf right now.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive into that one. I kind of had to skip around because I wanted to read yours, and then I also have your other one on the Vermilion, Angels in Vermilion, that I've only done a precursory scan through, but I'm definitely looking forward to delving into that one. We had discussed that just earlier online, where you and I were talking about the stones that burn, and
that's right.
Yeah, and one of the first things that I thought when I read that in the originals was sulfur, which you mentioned in the notes to because sulfur we use here absolutely for getting rid of any kind of evil daemon or any kind of negative spiritual presence. Sulfur.
And that's the context we see it in the Chaldean oracles, to get
right
to get rid of the dog-faced demons that show up.
Right. Exactly.
And
exactly.
so I think Proclus mentions the sprinklings of sulfur that the
right.
Theurgists use. So the burning stone, I think sulfur is a really, really safe solution. I think there are more solutions, but my problem is my knowledge of Middle Eastern languages isn't strong enough to, anytime you start trying to get into etymologies, you're already getting a little testy,
right.
because false etymologies are so easy to run into if you're not really familiar with those languages.
Right. Well, I actually was looking up. I was trying to figure out the ancient Egyptian word for sulfur, and I still can't find it. I have an entire dictionary. I have a 2-volume dictionary of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and the words, but I don't have it here. It's in another location because I'd lost my house in Hurricane Ida, my former house.
Oh, goodness.
And I had an entire library set up. I have, at this particular point, with what I've bought since I've been in this location, probably close to 2,700 books in my library, all of them on Greek history, Egyptian history, and the occult. And the library.
We need more of those.
Yeah, the library itself, believe it or not, is one of the few rooms that survived the storm. The entire roof blew off. The library was perfectly intact until I got the books out. When I got the books out, the roof caved in. So I really feel like the gods were protecting the library.
No doubt.
Yeah, so
no doubt.
a lot of them are stored on another Temenos that we have right now, and so I don't have access to it at this particular point. But I was trying to find some sort of etymological connection to the name of the stone, which I'm not even sure how to pronounce the Mezior or whatever.
I'm not sure either.
I'm not quite sure of the pronunciation. Mazoris,
like almost with the silent M, almost like an African M, like the African N, and Nikisi isn't really Nikisi, it's Nikisi. It's a fast, almost silent N. So I imagine it's something like that, but when they say Nazoris, that Zor root is the same root that you find for and Bezor stone, and we talked about that before also, the Bezor stones that the alchemists would find in the bellies of goats and especially cows. And the predominant belief was that they would eat serpents, and their digestive system would convert the serpent's venom into this stone. And, of course, intoxication and serpent venom goes way back. Carl Ruck talks about this ancient Greek notion that serpents would come by and get their venom from the poisonous plant, suck it out of the plants, and in some cases put it back in. So there's this connection between serpent venom and intoxication anyway. But the Bezor stone is supposed to, because it's made from serpent venom, it's then supposed to work as an apotropaic against serpents. So it has that same apotropaic effect that the Nazoris stone says to have in the Chaldean oracles, and they share that Zor root, which means it can mean both poison and antidote. Right.
So that was something you and I had talked about before that I found was very interesting, and then it occurred to me today as I'm reviewing the book, I'm scanning through on things that I wanted to kind of touch on with the spagyric stones of alchemy. That some of those stones may be, and you told me you had wrote about that in your Vermilion, Angels in Vermilion book, and I was like, God damn it, I got to read that one now.
That part is specifically in the appendix. The first appendix is on Hecate and Harmala, and it's in there where I talk about the burning stones. That's where I first started in on this territory, was after writing Angels, and I had this leftover piece that I couldn't fit into the larger scheme but it seemed highly significant because it referenced Savage Rue, Paganum harmalices, and it was referencing it in terms of an animated statue. So it was really trying to tie up that loose end, which I couldn't with angels, so I just used it as an appendix. But it was trying to tie that loose end up that really led me to say, wait a minute, because my book isn't about finding drugs in Neoplatonism or Homer. That's not my concern. Michael Ranella already did that with his Pharmacon book. He did it magnificently. Right. But my concern was to lay out, to give the reader a clear, concise picture of the theory and praxis of theurgy, and then B, say, how curious it is that it's here in Homer. But the Homer thing, as a writer, I had to be safe and not entertain the notion that theurgy is in Homer. I had to, basically look at it as though the Neoplatonists are projecting Neoplatonism, the theurgy, into Homer, strictly from an academic perspective.
Right.
But my personal feelings are that I don't think they're wrong. When Proclus says that if we take this funeral pyre ritual that Achilles performs for Patroclus, and if this is done on a living person, that's essentially theurgy. Most scholars are looking at that and saying, well, he's just saying it looks kind of like theurgy. What Achilles is doing has nothing to do with raising the soul of Patroclus up into the heavens. But in fact, it does. If you read, Patroclus comes to Achilles and says, take me out, get me out of Hades. I'm stuck. If you would do this ritual, I could ascend and be with the heroes in the Lycian fields. And if that wasn't enough, at the end of the ritual, which Proclus doesn't comment on, but Achilles, he does this ritual all night long until he sees the morning star ascend on the horizon. Which all the way back to ancient astrology and ancient Sumeria, Babylonian astrology, that's Venus, that's Ishtar, leaving Ker, leaving the Sumerian underworld and coming back up into the heavens. So for him to say, oh, there's the star that leaves the underworld and goes into the heavens, for that to signal the end of his ritual is more than a clear indication that what he's doing has to do with the ascent of his soul.
Absolutely. And I think the thing is that what they get caught up in the semantics of it, in that it's not theurgy because we don't hear about theurgy till the 2nd century AD, but it's like just because they didn't have a name for it doesn't mean the elements of it were not present throughout the religious aspects of the ancients. A lot of the things, just because they didn't have a name for it back then, they didn't refer to it as theurgy, doesn't mean that it wasn't there, that some of the practices weren't there. And I think that with the Neoplatonists...
go ahead.
No, I was saying that with Iamblichus, his thing was that he wanted to use theurgy as a way to revive the ancient religion, as a way to bring it back to where it should have been or where it was at one point. And validate it at the same time. Right, exactly. That, I think, is something that people are missing because they kind of look at that as the age of unreason when theurgy came into play. Like, oh, well, the religion was dying, so they resorted to all this. No, they were trying to bring it back to where it's supposed to be because it had got separated between mind and soul, where instead of mind and soul being combined together to make a complete person, the philosophical side said, all you need is mind. And the theurgic side said, no, you need both. The mind's only going to take you so far, and then after that, you have to move into the irrational side of things. You have to use the words of power to the things that don't make sense, or where you find, the aspect. I usually, when I'm teaching students, when I explain the irrationality, I talk about the Pythagoreans when they first figured out irrational numbers, and they freaked the hell out. Because they, up until that point, they viewed number as reality, And if you have a number that is infinite, then it's a mathematical proof of the infinity of the universe. and they didn't know what to do with that shit. They were like,
Right. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, we got to keep this secret. This is a little bit much, you know, and and
the irrational. The problem too is we use that same word to define things that are supra-rational, and that's really what we're talking about with theurgy. Is we're talking about something that picks up when the domain of dialectic discourse runs completely dry. Discursive talking runs dry. At that point, you turn to barbarous tongues. You turn to ritual actions that have symbolic value that transcend language because it encompasses and surpasses it at the same time.
Exactly. And like you and I have talked about this before, I absolutely love to read the theoretical, scholarly interpretations of theurgy, but my primary concern as an individual is the practicality of it, the practice of theurgy.
That's right.
And any person that's been involved in the rituals, which one day I hope I can get you down here to come for a ceremony, when we intone those words of power, those barbarous names, there is a absolute shift in reality. and
oh, sure.
And there's no denying it, and it's not something that's subjective, because a lot of the people that attend don't have no idea what the hell we're doing, and they feel the difference. You know, they see the phenomena that occurs that Amblicus talks about. You know, when he talks about things, the ceremony, I don't know if I sent you those pictures where we did a catharsis ritual and the mist came out of the ground during that ceremony. That ceremony was, that ceremony was based off of the ritual that Odysseus does.
Odysseus is Nicaea.
Right. It's based off of that ritual. And the concept of it was that we were going to open, the person that we were doing this for was afflicted with a very severe form of miasma. And every other cleansing that we were able to do was ineffective. And so I did a huge, I think it was 14 days cleansing on myself to prepare for this ceremony with fasting and sleep deprivation and the whole shebang. And when we did this ceremony, we were not expecting this mist to come, but the idea was that the souls of the dead would come up from the underworld through the pit and basically eat the miasma off of the individual to get rid of it and take it back down into the underworld. And it was extremely successful after that. Yeah, for a while. That particular person was constantly in a state of miasmic thought and action. So the cleansing
for some people, that stuff can be a form of health. You know, when we talk about sympatheia and being in sympathy with the great change, sometimes the closest a person can get to a stasis is by illness. That's their way, their soul's way of actually maintaining health, because the opposite direction would actually be fatal.
Right. And there's something I want to talk about with that, but I'm not going to right now. I'm going to talk to you about it privately, because something you just said is absolutely striking home with a student that I had recently, where the oracle, our Hermantic oracle, literally said that exact same thing, that this particular person could not function in a world that was not chaotic. It was the only thing that they knew. And
there's a nurse named Margaret A. Newman, who I'm no kin to her, I don't think, but she came up with this. It's considered a grand nursing theory presented in this book she wrote called Health as Expanding Consciousness. And it's this notion that if you are too much in a direction of life, then that's going to kill you, and your soul will correct it with illness, with miasma.
Right.
And that's her theory.
Right.
But I think
And
that's Platonic. That's
Yeah.
sympatheia. That's Stoic.
It's about finding the balance. That's what theurgy is about. That's, the oracle that we use, the Hermantic oracle, is designed specifically to find out where your imbalances are. And that includes, and the interesting thing about it is that there's certain patterns that will arise that will tell you you have too much light at this point in time.
Which oracle are you talking about? Which oracle are you talking about?
It's an oracle that was revealed to me during a 2-year process of me working through the Greek magical papyrus.
It's a personal oracle.
It's a personal oracle, yeah. Its base foundation is most similar to geomancy, but it's sacred to Hermes, and it uses 4 pieces of turtle shell, and one side is white and one side is black, and you cast them down. It's actually similar to both geomancy and similar to the Ifa. But
I was going to say, if it's similar to
yeah.
geomancy, have you compared it to Ifa?
Yeah, it's similar to both, but it has its own unique interpretation. It took me. It was revealed to me. The process was revealed to me over a 2-year course of ritual, intense ritual, and I functioned. This was in Walker, Louisiana, and I had a Taminos there, and I lived for 2 years with no electricity, a complete ascetic lifestyle, very little human contact, daily ritual, all based off of the Greek magical papyrus, very much similar to the Abramelin system. In that every day that you went through, you increased this energy until an epiphany occurred. And in that epiphany, when it occurred at the end of the 2 years, or towards the end of the 2 years, it revealed to me this process, which I had bits and pieces already. And then it just kind of all, like somebody opened my brain and poured all this in. And then I've spent time working on the interpretations of it, using the oracle yes or no answers to get a deeper insight into it, into each one. But it literally will tell you at times that this particular pattern is so good that it's not good. Because you are out of balance. It's not good for you to have too much light, because eventually it's going to have to find its balance. So what you want to do is
you kind of get that with the chamalongos and with the cowries. If you get the even too closed, too open, even though you would think all open is a clean yes, a balanced yes is better.
Exactly.
Too close, too open is a safer yes.
It's actually almost identical to that in the way that those patterns fall. And that's,
it's interesting you use turtle shell too, because the turtle shell is, you probably already know this, was used by the Choctaw and I think the Chickasaw too as a divination mode. I don't know exactly what they did with it, but something with turtle shells was used for divination. And I know you've probably seen where you can use the turtle shell as a lunar calendar.
Yes,
it has the
yes,
28,
I've seen that.
28 scales, and then another, 13 in the middle. So you can count the days and the months if you're using a lunar calendar.
Right. I've seen that one. I was not aware of the divination with the native tribes.
I don't know what they
do
do with it.
Yeah.
I just know that that's something to do with, I believe it's what we call here the Mississippi box turtle, but they would do something with the shell as a means of divination.
Yeah. For us, the turtle, I mean, you can purchase the shell, but for the ones that I have, it was actually where I was living at, there was a pond in the back, and I was actually able to get the turtle from there and cleansed it and offered it up for that purpose.
And so folks that are familiar with philosophy and even some Neoplatonism, when they hear you talk about things like, taking turtles out of a swamp for Greek-style ritual, for most listeners, that's going to sound like hoodoo, like you're talking about hoodoo. But that's really the beauty about the PGM and things like Palo Mayombe. They're inherently African rituals, but they resemble what I encountered growing up. I mean, some of the stuff I've seen in the PGM, I'm thinking, man, that is the shit my granny was doing when I was
exactly.
little. The same kind of stuff, and it just is kind of mind-boggling because people who are into magic, but not necessarily into philosophy, you'll see a tendency to reduce things like what we're talking about, hoodoo, voodoo. You even see, for example, Pascal Beverly Randolph, who I have a lot of respect for, but he would separate between his magic and the magic he encountered in New Orleans, which he claimed was demonic. And, you just see this tendency to say, well, there's high magic, and that's what white people do, and then there's low magic, and that's what black people do. And it's really prevalent here.
It's ridiculous.
But
that's ridiculous.
When you look at the Greek magical papyri, you come out saying, well, here are spells from probably the apex of the magical world. If there was a high magic, this is where it comes from. And when we compare it to what modern scholars would prefer, particularly out of traditions like the Golden Dawn or the Ogdoadic tradition, any of those Western magical traditions would call high magic, they would look at this stuff and say, well, that's just hoodoo, or it's just, you just dismiss it. And it's mainly because they have that Gnostic, and I don't mean all Gnostic, but you know what I mean when I say that Gnostic disgust for the body and for anything material, and they can't fathom the notion that there could be anything of power in something that negligible.
Right, and that's the thing for me. That's the beauty of what Iamblichus said, because even some of your Platonists in the later days felt that way. They started to pull away from that, the body is a prison, and Iamblichus was like, no, the body is necessary. It's a necessary.
He gives that in his order of the Platonic dialogues. He starts out with the Phaedo, where we have the image of the body as a prison, but then he eventually gets into the body as the means by which the spirit finds expression. So it's clear. I mean, Plato presents both ideas, but it's clear that he's presenting them for a different reader, a different audience. For a person, it could be the same reader, but it's certainly at a different level of his development.
Right, exactly. And the same thing with Iamblichus. He says that the theurgy needs to be catered to the person and their level of understanding. For some people, the mental aspect of it or the mathematical aspect of it is their theurgy. And for some of them, they need the ritual. Some people don't need the ritual. Some people can do it through the mental aspect, but not everybody's capable of that. And so you have
one thing I like that Shaw stresses, he says, even the people who can do the mathematical theurgy, he says that it doesn't mean they skipped the other stuff.
Exactly. And I love Shaw. Him and I had some good conversations. Yeah, back in the day, him and I had some good conversations. I actually messaged him through academia.edu a while back because he had posted a new paper, and I downloaded everything he had on there, and I was like, I had lost contact with him for a while. I had one of our listeners has messaged in to wanted to know what the PGM was. I think they're taking notes. So
that's a can of worms.
Oh yeah, that's the PGM is actually the copy is sitting right there on my desk. It's the Greek Magical Papyri in translation, and it is a collection of ancient spells and magical practices that sat up in a museum for a long time until some scholars realized that this had some value and started translating it. It's a bit daunting when you first look at it. I got my first copy in 1999, I believe, is when I got my first copy, and it sent me on that 2-year quest, which I originally published some of it, and I see Justin brought his copy, a book called Scrolls of Manetho. Manetho was the magical name that I took during this particular experimentation because it was Manetho was one of the priests of Serapis in Egypt, and I wanted to have some sort of a connection to that Hellenized Egyptian energy current that the PGM is permeated by. And so I took that magical moniker during the course of that. But the book's out of print now. I took it out of print because I want to do a revised copy with my journal notes and a lot of other stuff. But anyway, I'm working on that.
I can't wait for that.
Yeah. I
There's not
didn't
enough
put it.
books out there, enough research on the PGM. I can count on one hand the number of books that are about the PGM.
Yeah, and this is a practical experimentation. This isn't just this has absolutely no scholarly research. This is me fucking around and finding out, essentially.
Yeah. That's how you do with this stuff. I mean, you can the way those rituals work, you can approach it as a kind of a ritual theorist and deconstruct them in terms of their signatures by their suntamata and symbola. You can do that, and it's perfect. You're able to do that. They're constructed that well, but that's not where the beauty is.
Right.
Once you start messing with those works, especially the ones that are initiatory, the teletai. There's one in there that's even called a telete ritual, meaning like an initiation into a mystery.
Right.
And it's the one that we discussed that has the, you have to get the bile of owl bile, or if you can't get that, you have to have the egg of an ibis.
Right.
For the listeners who aren't familiar, this is the kind of thing that it calls for. And if you're at all familiar with but hoodoo practices here in the South, a lot of them are very similar, involving, I've had some spells involve, stuff from scent glands from animals and, snake skin and saliva from livestock, different things that you would associate more with, like Albertus Magnus, if you've seen some of his books on medicine.
Oh, yeah.
It's like that. And but insanely effective, and not just. The thing is, until I got messing with the PGM, I did not buy into thaumaturgy at all. I thought that was kind of the charlatans, like, here's some illusions that, can at best give people faith that something else is possible. But no, I've seen some pretty weird shit with the PGM.
Oh yeah. We have one now. Now it's funny you should mention the ibis egg, because I was trying to get you one, and I know that the person who has access to something just doesn't seem to want to get it. And so Bobby, when you're listening, when you're listening, Bobby, you're disappointing not just me but also Newman here. So
that's right.
I give her a hard time. But anyway, she's about to message Justin going, God damn it.
That's
but
they're like that. And and the theurgic explanation is the pharmaca application, which would be the suntamata and the symbola. That's Iamblichus's. Well, it's not just Iamblichus. We see it in Middle Platonism too. But he's the one that really gives us that picture of showing us how the gods are transcendent, but also immanent. That suntamata symbola solves the problem of immanence. Right. Exactly. That was so difficult for the Middle Platonists.
Right, and those things are believed to be imprinted on the soul by the forms. The forms are imprinted on the soul before birth, and so by manipulating, and by us using them, it communicates to the soul in a how did you say that, supra-rational way instead of an irrational way, that we don't really need to understand what it means, and in fact, by understanding it, sometimes can lessen the effect of it, rather than just letting it do. And I know you and I have had discussions about using entheogens in a spiritual context, and that's something that I will tell students a lot of times when they when we experiment with the entheogens on a spiritual level is to not try to control it at first.
Mm-hmm.
Let it take you where it's going to take you, because that's where you need to be. That's the information that you need to have at that moment. And then as you progress in the practices with it, you can start to get a little bit more control and get the visions to go where you want them to go.
Get your sea legs a little bit, right?
Right, yeah. Let it go where it needs to go first, because it's going to take you some weird-ass places. But you're talking
But
about
that's the difference in initiatory use and magical use.
Exactly.
I mean, initiatory use should be a big dose. It should be a big dose such that it shows you everything that's possible outside of the use of entheogens, to say, so that you leave with gnosis, saying, okay,
right.
I know that there is another realm, and that these rituals I'm doing are affecting something I can't normally see. I think that for that, it's got to be a big dose.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
when you're getting into magical use, like you're talking about, learning how to get your sea legs and use it for magic, I prefer the small doses. I prefer the small to medium doses. I really feel like I can affect something, whereas with the bigger dose, you really just have to surrender. You just have to give into it and accept the fact that this thing is smarter than you, because it really is. But once you've had that experience, a small amount is enough to link you up with that. Whatever it connects you to, you can usually tell, because most drugs are attached to a certain sephira in Kabbalistic language. You could say, like, aphrodisiacs are connected to Venus and Netzach. And what it's saying is that those drugs propel your consciousness into that domain in Kabbalistic terms. But in Greek magical terms, we're saying it connects us with this specific deity, which ultimately connects to a form in the mind of the demiurge, which we carry in our soul, as you said, as logoi, and through interacting with not just drugs, anything. But when you're on an entheogen, you can truly see how interacting with things has theurgic repercussions.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I've experimented with a wide variety of entheogens over the years. And exactly what you're saying, somebody who hasn't experimented with a variety doesn't understand that there's very distinct differences in the experience depending on what you're taking. And that coincides exactly with what you're saying, that it's tied to a specific place, a specific logos, or whatever you want to sephira, if you want to use the Kabbalistic terms. It is done that, because if you take datura, that is a profoundly different experience than if you take mescaline. Like,
absolutely,
they're completely different, and that is a consciousness that you're tapping into. That is a certain aspect of creation that you're sharing, or that it's being revealed. That's being revealed to you, or that you're partaking in, and it for people that haven't experienced that, they can't understand it. And I use this a lot with students. I'll tell them it's similar to an orgasm. You know, if you have to try to explain what an orgasm is to somebody who hasn't had one, you're never going to do it justice. They can't comprehend it until they have one. It's something that has to be experienced. And I use that word specifically because an orgasm is a spiritual type thing. I mean, there's no way you can put that into words. You can explain the biology just like science can explain to you what the entheogen does to your brain, but it cannot explain what it does to your soul.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And there was I think it may have been Schlupp, it may have been someone else. I know I read it in Schlupp. He may have been quoting someone else, but he was talking about Suntamata and said how matter completely transcends rationality. When we look at matter as such, the Aristotelian problem of matter, and how it transcends reason, and how because it transcends reason, it's closer to the one. So he makes this point saying that no wonder the theurgists were able to interact with the monad through things as simple as matter because they transcend understanding. The language is, the logic is kind of twisted until you think about what he's saying, and it's like you're right. I had the same problem with reading Porphyry, where Porphyry is talking about the cave, and he says that the rocks in the cave represent the forms. Now, when I was reading this, I'm anticipating it, and I know he's going to say the rocks represent matter. He's going to say the rocks represent the matter, and the cave is earth and its incarnation. But no, he says they're the forms because they're unchanging and don't move. So it's like this. It's like a great logic that's not intuitive.
Well, if you think of it in terms of the law of octaves, which is something that we get into a lot, I often, when you think in terms of Greek mythology, you think in terms of the Titans and then the Olympians, and then of course your cosmic deities before the Titans, your universal deities, as the same things, the same energies reflected on a lower octave. I like that. Right, the Titans are actually the Olympians on a higher octave. They're a little. And
we see the same action, with Cronus castrating Uranus and Zeus.
Right.
In some versions, he actually castrates Cronus.
Right. And so the story repeats itself, and to me, that's just a mythological expression of the idea of fractals, a fractal universe, where the same. The absolute cornerstone of all occultism is as above, so below, and it all is a reflection of that as far as I'm concerned. And that's one of the key things. So when you look at it in relation to what you're talking about with Homer and the Heart of Theurgy, with the concept that, that the Neoplatonists are projecting theurgy into Homer, they're really kind of like finding it on a different octave, that it was there before.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, and somehow or another it got mixed up, and we found a name for it, and they're trying to, which we know is what Iamblichus was trying to do, was trying to reinstate the sense of the mystical inside the religion. And something we had talked about on a previous show, I know Justin and I talked about, is, you mentioned it briefly here, that modern scholars, when you mention theurgy or you mention the similarities between it and hoodoo and Palomayombe and all these other religions, religious or spiritual practices, they tend to want to look at it as some sort of separate thing. And a lot of people don't realize that philosophy was very much active, and that the ancient religions, especially in the Greek religion, was in theogenic. It was ecstatic religion. There were elements that are extremely similar to hoodoo and to voodoo and to Palomayombe and the practices that were done. And it doesn't take a whole lot of research to find those connections, but I think that the problem is that you have this idea that the West wants to believe that the source of our culture, Western society, is this pristine, all-white concept, where the temples were these magnificent, gleaming white temples. They weren't. They were painted, vibrant colors. These people were taking hallucinogens. Nobody, I have friends in Greece who practice a continuation of the ancient religion, and they'll tell you straight the hell up, yeah, they used drugs.
There's no doubt.
There's
no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, there's
cursory
no
glance
doubt.
at Michael Ranella's Pharmacon book, there's no question that they were absolutely aware of not just the intoxicating properties of drugs, but the entheogenic potential of them, including things that we would consider base, like wine. Wine is entheogenic under the right circumstances, especially when we look at how it was used in the Corybantes mysteries with the playing of the aulos and the tambourines and the rhythmic drumming and what they call the thronosis ritual, the thronosis rite. They're basically giving you a private concert with wine. Now, we're desensitized to that because we drive around in cars all day with music playing. But back then, to have an organized, systematic concert presented for you and it was pretty complex. You know, they had a different mode. The Greeks had a different mode for each planet, and they understood that each person descended from one of these planets, ultimately, that they were part of their Syra or chain. So they'd play these 7 modes until you responded to one. And they insisted that each soul has only one song that it actually responds to. But they would put them in these ecstatic trances through sound, line, you know, things that we don't necessarily think about as entheogenic. And as far as when you mentioned Iamblichus kind of validating these religions, when you read in De Mysteriis and he's talking about trance drumming, he's talking about spirit possession by gods, and he's talking about animated statues, all of these things, I have never seen anywhere today in practice except in African traditional religions and diaspora traditions like Palo Mayombe. They have the spirit possession. They're fully aware of Suntamata and Sumbola, which they execute with their herbal correspondences for each of the Orishas and Mpungos and Palo. They have their Nkisi statues and their spirit pots that they animate the same exact way that Iamblichus is describing. They are doing that. It's alive in ATR.
You need to come here. You need to come here because we have all of that. We have all of that. We have
it's unbelievable to me.
The Pixis. We have the Kachachi, which are the divine possessions. We have the animated statues. We have the whole shebang. And all of these things developed organically through the practice of PGM, the PGM rituals and the research. We have about 30 seconds left, so we're going to have to wrap this up. But I absolutely want to thank you for coming on the show. For everybody who's listening, Homer and the Heart of Theurgy, when's it going to be out?
Hopefully this year it'll come out with Inner Traditions, but if not, we should see it early next year.
All right, good deal. I'll make sure to keep me posted on it, and I'll post some advertisements for it on our page and let our students know that they need to get a copy. And
thanks, Monte.
Yeah, we can talk for days on end, you and I know that. So, but thank you again.
We'll schedule one in the future.
We'll definitely do it again. All right, well, they're about to shut us off, so you have a good one, man.
All right, man.
You too, brother. Bye-bye.